So Dr. Lowe, he studied aerospace engineer, and he worked a lot with oceanography, underwater acoustics in the Air Force and the Air Force.
Yeah.
And then he's been a teacher for 30 years.
Yes.
But before that, you work a lot in business.
Yes.
So you
international business.
International business,
Yes.
And teaching international business
Yes.
for 30 years. And
Yes.
in the meantime, you dedicated a lot of time to study
cancer and neuroscience.
And now you are going to introduce to us what is the human affectome.
That's it.
I'm sorry if I missed.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Something. Thanks.
Yeah. So, hi everyone. Nice to meet you all. Really informal today, so I'm happy to take questions while I'm talking or whatever. I'm just going to tell you a bit of a story. We published 12 articles in a special issue of Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews in the last couple of years. And I say the last couple of years, some of the work was published like in 2019, 2020, but the last article, which was a synthesis of all of those pieces, was just published recently. So I'm going to tell you about that article and kind of the process to get there and why you should care about it, I guess. A quick question. How many of you have would consider yourselves in some way? Well, first of all, are you a neuroscience background? How many neuroscience backgrounds? Pretty much everybody? Yeah. And how many of you consider yourselves effective neuroscience researchers? Okay. How much do you know about emotions and feelings and kind of the work that's been done on emotions and feelings in the field?
There are two psychologists here.
Yes. Okay. So
know about emotion, maybe.
Yeah. Fair enough. And I'm going to speak to that a little bit. I just try to get a flavor for who's here. So I'll just give you kind of a quick now it's not moving. Oh, just need to move it over. Okay. So I'll give you some background and I'll talk about the paper and then I'll talk to you about like, so what? And you know, I'm hoping some of you will see ways in which this might be relevant for what you do, etc. And I'll put some caveats around this because the first 2/3 of this, I'm going to talk about what we did and what we published, and then I'm going to talk about my own thoughts about kind of what we didn't get done and where we need to go. And I'll put disclaimers on that when I get to it because it's not peer reviewed; it's just me talking. So I'll try and put some lines around that. So I want to give you a little bit of background. I was doing a PhD in management dissertation effort, and my prof said to me, "Where's the thinking, feeling, emotional individual in management research?" Now I had a background in business, so I'm interested. I did an MBA. I'm thinking I'll do a PhD in management, and so the only school that had a PhD in management was close to me, and I signed up for it. I got in, and once I did all the coursework and I got to the dissertation question, this is the question he posed. Now, my advisor, there was only a couple of choices for advisors, and the guy I picked was a critical feminist theorist. So he wanted to pick apart all the management literature and say it was all done by men. We don't like it, and it's all part of the patriarchy, and it's flawed. And if you could write something that was critical about the existing literature, he'd be happy. I mean, that was his kind of mindset. So I set off sort of following his guidance to figure out what I was going to write about. And he asked me to start with reading philosophy. So, you know, I'm reading Habermas and Foucault and Sartre and all this literature. I have no idea how this fits in. We had to read mountains of management science literature about, you know, the good industrial organization and how to make efficient workers, etc. It's a bizarre kind of combination of things that I was reading at the time. But after doing a fair amount of research, you know, the question he was asking was not an unreasonable one. It was like, how do we have theories about why is somebody committed at the workplace, or are they going to stay at their job, or how do we make workers more efficient? This is all based on human behavior. And what do we know about human behavior? You know, we have Skinner's work and Freud's work and current psychology, but everything is going, all psychology is going to psychobiology, and all of neuroscience is going, you know, it's all blending together. It's essentially everything's a neuroscience question. So I came back to him and I said, it's a neuroscience problem. You know, we don't understand the individual. And so if we haven't got a good basis of what causes human behavior, we can't have good science on how to deal with people in the workforce. And he said, okay, that's all really interesting, because I worked for months on this. But he said, I'm not that guy, right? I'm not the advisor for that dissertation. If it's a neuroscience problem, you need somebody else, and I can't help you. I want you to write a critical paper. And I kind of went, eh. So, I mean, I knew that that's where it was going to end up. But the fact is that my dissertation at that moment was dead. I had no direction for my PhD. Okay. 10 years later, there was a gap. I didn't finish my PhD at the time. I walked away from it. And I had 2 cancer deaths in my family. An aunt who was very close to me when I was young. My grandfather had died, and I spent time with him when he was dying. I mean, it was a horrible process, but I was like there every day. And I started doing cancer research in my spare time. I was thinking, I'm interested to know what cancer researchers know. Like, what do they know? Just I didn't expect to find anything particularly fascinating. Just I wanted to understand where they were. I didn't want to be a scientist. It's just like, what's the state of the science in cancer research? So I started reading peer-reviewed cancer articles in my spare time. And I would get up every morning and I would read, you know, PubMed abstracts and full text articles if I could get them. And I would Googling stuff, because my science degree was now 20 years old and out of date. And I didn't know anything about the genome or anything. I mean, I was really starting from nothing. So I was doing all this stuff. And I thought, oh, well, this is harder than I imagined. And 8 years went by, where each year I would say, okay, I still don't understand this stuff, and I'm still really confused, and I feel like I'm never going to figure it out, so I'm just going to give up. But I'd be thinking, yeah, I just spent 4 years doing this. I'm not giving up. I'm going to, you know, maybe next month I'll be on top of it. Anyway, 8 years it took me to get there. Here's what I sort of concluded in the process. The field of cancer research at the time, it was as though, and I try to give you some kind of metaphor that you can think of. It's like somebody from the future comes into the room and smashes a computer in front of a bunch of scientists and says, this is the problem. And they all go and they look at it and they go, oh, I have no idea what that is, but that little bit looks interesting, and I'm taking that back to my lab. And they all go in different directions, and they all work on something that's interesting to them. That's what was going on in cancer research at the time. Everybody was working on something different. And there were little clusters of people working on the immune system, and little clusters of people working on tissue invasion and metastasis, and some people working on cellular proliferation, and some people working on surrounding tissues in the microenvironment, and all these different areas. And they had their own conferences, and they published in their own journals. And then there were people who just did breast cancer, and people who just did kidney cancer. And I mean, it was a mess. And so, and I was like, from Mars. I came in, I didn't know any of this. I'm just reading everything. Like, what is all this about? Trying to make sense of it. So, you know, I couldn't make sense of it. I was like, I have no idea how all this stuff fits together. And it just year after year after year, until I started, it got to the point where I started to be able to understand the terms and what they were doing. But then it was like I was looking at pieces of the puzzle, and now I could read what was on the puzzle piece because I had to learn the language of the scientists. But then I had to figure out, okay, do these pieces fit together at all? one day I stumbled on a paper called The Hallmarks of Cancer, and had only been out a few years when I got there. And this was brilliant. Okay. This was a single paper that took 6 areas of cancer research and said, this is how they fit together. And I went, whoa, light bulb, huge. I get it. Okay. I can see this. But I was thinking, oh, they're missing a bunch of stuff. Like, where's the stuff on the immune system? And where's the stuff on tissue invasion? And where, like, there were pieces missing that I had been reading about. So I emailed the guy and I said, no, I just read your paper. It blew my mind. I mean, I didn't use those terms, but I was like, I'm really excited. And like, thank you for such a great orienting paper. This is really exciting for me because I've been reading a lot of cancer research and this really shows me how these pieces fit together. What about this thing? What about this thing? And what about this thing? And he said, well, your timing is good. We're working on the second version of the paper. And the next version we're going to come up with is coming out soon. And it was actually this one over here, which included all these other areas. Now, this little graphic is from their paper, but I just want to show you that they took pieces in the field that they could see fit together and they put them together into a model. And that was hugely helpful for people in the field because people didn't know how their pieces fit together in many cases. And then 10 years later, they published a more advanced synthesis, if you will, and brought everybody together and went, okay, this is more advanced. So this is kind of where I was coming into my own. At least I understood what they were doing, and it really helped me understand the field. Now, most recently, and haven't even read this paper, in the last couple of years, they published another version. So this would be another 10 years on. And so there is even a third generation of this. But this is kind of what happened in the cancer field. Back here in the middle, I started asking people about this model, this one, and saying, okay, well, if this is how cancer works, and if we draw from all that we know in all these different segments, and now we know about the biology of cancer and how the pieces interrelate in ways that we never knew before, that has really important implications for cancer therapy. Because in cancer therapy, we're targeting single cell types in some cases, but when we have a tumor in cancer, it's not homogeneous, it's heterogeneous. It has many different subpopulations of cells. And if you treat the cancer, some of the cells die and it looks like the person's getting better. And then the other ones are resistant to treatment and because they're different, and they come back and the person is overwhelmed and you can't. And there may be so many subpopulations, one treatment's never going to work. And the types of treatments we use are so toxic, you can't combine them into like dozens of them. And so there's no way to treat them. And people have cancers that are untreatable. And what a question I wanted to ask was, well, what if we know all these targets? What if we could find softer ways to get all the targets? Like use plants, for example, which have the same kind of agonists that act on the same receptors, but you can take a ton of resveratrol out of a grape and you can have thousands of milligrams of it a day and it won't hurt you and no side effects. But that's like one part of cancer biology. And we need to get at maybe 30 or 40 pieces of cancer biology. So we need huge mixtures of safe things to mix them together. Okay. And I applied the same logic to cancer causation and chemicals that you're exposed to in products that you eat every day, your foods, etc., because all the safety testing of every chemical that you ingest is usually based on you being exposed to one chemical at a time and then figuring out what's a safe dose level, but nobody's figuring out what happens if we hit 10 different things at a time with 10 different chemicals, and there's no testing on that at all. Okay. So these were questions that I was posing that were enabled by the presence of a framework. This is important because we're going to talk about the human affectome next. But I want you to understand where my head was at when we got here. So I started contacting scientists, and I wasn't a scientist. I only had a bachelor's degree at the time, and it was old. And I would email them and I'd say, well, I read in your paper that, this is a problem, but why isn't that getting fixed? And the answer inevitably was, well, this is my area. This is what I do. You know, I focus on this, and yes, that's a problem, but I don't do that. And then when I talk to the person over here and say, why aren't you doing something about it? I see you talking about it. They'd say, well, this is my area over here. This is what I do. You know how it works. You're all in academia now, or at least enough to sort of know how specialized people that do PhDs are. So I started saying, what if I brought some people together from different areas and put together sort of cross-disciplinary teams to work on this problem from areas in all these different areas, and we like do something as a group? And people were like, yeah, that would be really cool. So I brought together 350 scientists from 31 countries. Initially, I built a website. I formed an advisory board. I showcased all the advisors on the website. So these were like high profile people with their own labs. They were PIs with, good high impact sort of profile. And then I spammed 40,000 cancer scientists with an email from my work. My work was really unhappy about it because we had like 1,000 people sign up for the project. I created a form on the website where people could put in their details and say, I'm interested in what team am I going to be on and who is my team leader going to be. And I selected team leaders, and you worked with the team leaders to select teams. And then I went to top 5 cancer journals out of about 200 cancer journals and said, we want to do a special issue on this topic. Would you publish our work? And 2 of them said yes. And so we got 2 different top journals to publish the work, and we did a huge project and had good outcomes. That was my cancer history. Didn't take too long. Yeah.
So how was this process to get to be in touch with the scientists? Because it's not easy that you receive an email from you don't know who.
Yeah.
And you answer.
They told
maybe
me
you don't even answer them.
They told me that I wrote really good emails. I'm persistent. I used to be in sales at one point.
Okay.
It was a lot of referencing, you know. I built an advisory board first, one person at a time. I probably invited 100 people to be on the advisory board and managed to get maybe a dozen. But the dozen that I got were really good, and they were smart people who saw these are real problems that needed to be solved. And then I put the advisory board page in the email and said, you know, I'm working with this advisory board because they don't know me. This is the challenge that we want to take on, and we want to build teams to do it. People were invigorated by the idea. And when I brought them together, they were excited that they were working with people they don't normally work with, because it was a multifaceted problem, and typically their focus is like this. And they were being asked to work on the stuff that they're good at, but also to be part of a synthesis to do something greater. So the process worked very well. Okay. We published 24 reviews in 2 top-tier publications, 2 syntheses. I don't know what the plural of synthesis is, but a synthesis for each of the 2 projects, where we brought all the teams together and said, okay, so what? And those were like publications that had almost 200 co-authors on them. We did several rounds of generating the paper and letting everybody give input, and we edited and edited and edited and edited until we had final papers. And that all worked quite well. And when this project was done, I had people telling me, are you going to do this conference every year? You know, is this going to continue? Or you're going to keep driving this? And I was like, no, I'm done. But I said, in my own private time, I was like, I know where there's a problem that could use 200 scientists working on it. And that was affective neuroscience, which from my research, I realized was in a state that was messier than cancer research was. And there was no orienting, detail for that. I mean, if you go and look in affective neuroscience and see what people are doing, it's all over the map, and everybody's doing something different. And it's not straightforward to figure out how these pieces fit together at all. And I was thinking, if I bring together 12 teams of researchers in a bunch of different areas and say, we're going to build a model about feelings and emotions that helps us understand how all these pieces fit together, that would be something that would be helpful for the field. I didn't mention, by the way, that the hallmarks of cancer paper is one of the most cited papers of all time. It is some stunning number of citations. Now, I don't care about citations, but my point is it's useful. Like a lot of people are focused on that paper because it helped them understand the sort of landscape. Okay. So, how did this work? Well, this is interesting. So the first thing I figured out, because I'd been reading all this affective neuroscience, was how did people decide to start an optimism lab? Or, I'm going to have my lab focus on happiness or grief or pessimism or you name it. Some number of what they would call social emotions. We focus on attachment, or we focus on loneliness or whatever. And I was like, where's the list of feelings? How many are there? There must be a list. Somebody must have a list. If all these labs have picked, but instead it's like the computer that got smashed on the ground and everybody went and ran away with a piece of it. They all had a piece. I'm really excited. I'm going to study loneliness and I'll spend the next 20 years of my career studying loneliness. But how does that fit into the bigger picture? I don't know. That's somebody else's problem, right? Okay. So I just wanted to know how many feelings are there. And I started just going like a layperson. I still was a layperson. I started going and doing going to lab websites. Who has a list of feelings? Anybody who could give them to me. Now, this was before AI, and it was AI is actually not bad at giving a list, but it takes a lot of prompting to get the AI to do anything accurately. But I was just putting feelings together. I think I might have come up with 70 or 80, okay, from all the different places that I could get to. Now, there was no rhyme or reason as to why people had focused on the things that they were focused on, but I had a big list. I thought, okay, that's a big list. So I went on Upwork. Anybody know what Upwork is? You hire people to do stuff in different countries, whatever. But it was a precursor to Upwork, whatever, something that merged into becoming Upwork. And I hired a supercomputer programmer out of Russia before the Russia-Ukraine thing to trawl petabytes of data with a computational linguistics approach and try to give me a list of feelings. And anybody want to guess how many he came back with? 7. 70? 7. No. Bigger. Like way bigger.
1,000.
1,000. Anybody else?
140.
140. Okay, good. It was more than 4,000. Now, what is that? What is that? What are 4,000 words that we use to express feelings? So I'm thinking, okay, I now have the biggest list in the world of feelings. So what do I do with that? Does anybody in the field of affective neuroscience know what that list is? Could we organize it? Does it belong to, if I went back to what people are doing, do they fit in nice, neat bins and they have them all looked after anyway? Has anybody seen this list? What would I do with it? Right? I mean, I spent $50 to get the list. And I'm like, what do I do with this list? So I said, okay, I'm going to do what I did before. Well, actually, I'm going to, yeah. I don't know, maybe yeah. I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to get a bunch of scientists together to form an advisory board to figure out what this is. And I coined the term human affectome because I was thinking 4,000, 5,000 feelings is a lot of feelings. And what do we know about that? Like, how does that inform what we're doing in neuroscience? Or does it? I don't know. It's a big list and nobody has it. I'm the only one apparently who has it at the moment. So I recruited an advisory board. I got team leaders recruited. I put teams together. I recruited a top journal and I created the Human Affectome project. And I invited everybody to come to Halifax, which is where I was located at the time, like I did in the cancer projects. We had a workshop. Then we went away and we worked on papers. And then we did a synthesis, which is what I just published. That's what I'm here to talk about. That's kind of how I got here. Sorry, it's a long way to get here, but that'll help you understand. in this project, we redid the computational linguistics thing because, of course, when I showed up in front of 100 neuroscientists in Halifax, and I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm not even a cancer scientist officially, except I had a bunch of publications in cancer, and they're like, who are you? How come we're here? And what are you on about? And I said, well, I have, thousands of words and I think it could help. And they went, yeah, but like, that's not scientifically reproducible. And I said, I know that, but like, what do we make of it? Could it inform our effort? Because they were on board for the idea of creating a model for the field. Okay. Conceptually, they like the idea of figuring out how all those pieces fit together. And the language part, it was like, some of them were convinced it was a good idea. Some of them thought it can't hurt. Let's see what happens. So that was kind of the genesis of the project. Okay, we did redid this and we came up with another 4,000 or 5,000 words. That was the Russian supercomputer guy. This guy came up with 11,386 word senses. That means each word may have multiple senses of meaning. Like if you go to the dictionary, it has 3 senses. Meaning number 1, meaning number 2, meaning number 3. So we had 11,386, and then we used graduate students to cull them and sort them, and we brought it down to a list of 3,664 word senses of feelings. But that's still a big monster list, and there are synonyms in there, and we used something called WordNet. Some of you are probably familiar with it. And so we could identify synonyms quickly. And I just, I have them in a spreadsheet at home and I just deleted all the synonyms for the sake of, and I work with one word and leave the synonyms in a different column so that I'm not dealing with a bunch of duplicates. But it's not like 3,664 goes to 10. It's like 3,664 goes to like 2,800 or something. So it's still a big monster list. And what do we do with that? Okay. Now, just to give you an example, this is just a random selection, but we're talking about 3,600, let's call it in the thousands of these things. These are some sample feelings. Now, some of these ones over here, are like physiological. I'm hot, I'm thirsty, I can't breathe, I'm choking, I'm cramped physically, I'm cramped, I'm weak, exhausted maybe, tired. These are physiological bits. Some of these are like more probably from a psychological standpoint, they're cognitive or constructed. I feel alone. I feel like I'm generous, maybe an assessment of myself. I feel connected or abandoned. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of words on the social side of things about how you treat other people and how other people treat you. Okay. Abused, misused, silenced, and then, a bunch of, I feel overweight or short or fashionable or whatever. Does any of this stuff matter from a neuroscience standpoint? That was a question that we were posing in the project. Yeah.
Perhaps it's like a translation problem for me.
Sure.
But when you present the human affectome,
yes,
I related more to emotions.
Sure. So
but you're talking about feelings as something different from emotions.
Okay, so in the field of affective neuroscience, there's been a big mix-up over using the terms emotion and feeling. And people would take, let's say, feeling generous, alone or connected, and say those are social emotions. Or they might refer to them as feelings, like there was no kind of rhyme or reason. And then some people would say, no, there's only 6 emotions. And there's a lot of language issues, which is a problem, one of the problems we tried to approach. I would say this is not the first time this discussion issue has come up. And I would say that in general, what we've discovered is that everybody in the field now agrees that emotions have generally some sort of autonomic response that is not a conscious or a cognitive response necessarily, but an automatic reaction to something. And some of them, people refer to them as survival circuits, like fear, and that emotion, which is a very complex set of actions in your body, which may be accompanied by changes in heart rate or skin conductance or whatever, that term, which encompasses all of that, has a feeling component. So there's a difference between fear the emotion and fear the feeling. That there's a feeling of fear, and then there's fear the emotion, which is the whole consequence or activity. Now, the reason this is important is because, it is a great question, is because a lot of these have their own systems. I mean, you have to imagine that when we started calling things emotions, we called disgust an emotion because it's an automatic, it's like, oh, somebody got sick and you have an immediate reaction, right? And you have no control over that. Your body convulses. It just happens. So we said, oh, that's an emotion. And then people said, well, happiness is an emotion. But if you go now to a happiness lab, they say there's no such thing as happiness as an emotion. It's like a series of things that relate to positive emotion, but it's not an emotion in the way we think of fear, which has its own, freeze you up, make you paralyzed, those kinds of autonomic kind of reactions. Your thirst system or your need to go to the bathroom or the toilet. These are all sort of physical systems that have their own alerts. You're in trouble right now. You need to go to the bathroom. That has to be a priority. And that we don't call those emotions. When you're hungry, you need to eat. You need to eat. It's automatic, but we don't call it emotions. So some people call those drives, but they all have feeling labels. Okay, so now there is some agreement that in the physiological side of things that there are other affective experience other than emotions, which have feelings, other than these physiological parameters, which we label with feelings, other than our social constructs, which we also label with feelings, like I feel alone or whatever. There's also things like that we don't call feelings that are affective valenced experiences, positive and negative. Smells, we don't call smell a feeling, but it's definitely valence. We know when something smells good. We know when something smells bad. We know what's attractive or what repulses us. And that's common amongst most of these things. Usually if it's positively valenced, there's some attractive component to it. If it's negatively valenced, there's some avoidance component to it, despite whichever genre or whichever area we're in, whether they're emotions or drives or physiological systems or social constructs. No matter what it is, there's some attractive or repulsive kind of component to it. And the liking and the disliking is manifested in physiology. We'll talk about that, but that's all built in to our sort of ability to discern between what's positive and what's negative. And so these feeling terms encompass quite a range of things, not just emotions, if that answers your question. Sorry, go ahead.
The on the right with they seem more like characteristics than what.
Well, there's a whole group of people like that study PTSD and that talk about the self and our image of ourself, and that it's quite well understood that humans have an understanding of who they are. And so the question about all these, what you're calling characteristics, are they, what are they? What are these things? You could think about them as areas of concern that we have about ourselves that are either unacceptable or acceptable, or from our perspective, positive or negative. And you're right. They are interpretations of our characteristics, but that's a whole area of affective neuroscience where people talk about self-image and self-esteem and self understanding of who they are and whether or not their trajectory in life is continuous enough. And people who have neurological disturbances have disruptions in the continuity of themselves, and we see people with disorders that have multiple selves. So this is interesting in terms of, again, my question is, do we care? Maybe these are irrelevant from a neuroscience standpoint, but let's just agree that in language, at least, our first person report, which in psychology is often our most reliable sense of, at least initially, as to what we think is going on, not always what is going on, but at least it's something we have to start with. What does this matter to us? This is a question that we're posing. Sorry, another
Yeah.
question.
I have a question that in affective models, there are like, for example, there are models that have 6 emotions, 6 like big emotions,
Yes.
and then you have like
Yes.
70 emotions.
Yes.
And then, so this model is kind of, you are like presenting all of these emotions that could be.
You're just one step ahead of me. We're
Okay.
gonna get there. We're gonna get there.
Okay.
Okay, this is a good question because there have been several attempts to create models of emotions, but if you look at them, it's like, where did they get the pieces that became the model? Is it comprehensive? What do we do with the 3,600 feelings that we express in language? Is it relevant or irrelevant? I guess I was coming from it from a cynical side or a skeptical side. It's like, if you got a bunch of people, if you have a bunch of people who are all working on separate pieces and they say, let's try and figure out what this is, and they put a model together, the question is it comprehensive or is it just based on what everybody has for pieces? You know, what do we have here? So the goal of this project was to say, well, let's at least look at the language. Let's look at what we've been doing in the field and see if we can figure out what a synthesis might look like. Yeah. I'm gonna run long. I can tell that. You're like getting nervous. Am I okay? All right. So I brought together researchers from 200 researchers from 21 countries. I organized them into 12 teams. I got a top tier journal on board. I built teams around these themes. This was kind of based on kind of what I felt had some priority in the literature. There's a whole bunch of people that did emotional regulation, which I didn't include, but these are the teams that I ended up with. Now, this is not by no means a perfect choice of teams, but part of it was who would agree to be team leaders. And so in some cases, I was taking people who had come forward and, you know, someone said, I'm a researcher and I've got 200 publications and I study fear and I want to be a team leader in this project because I think it's exciting. And I'd be like, okay, we have a fear team. So part of it was, you know, recognizing that my ability to even discern what the full field looked like was not going to be perfect. I did the best job I could at creating a series of teams that represented some diversity of what was being done in the field. All right. We published 12 publications. Every team published 1 review article. Sorry, you can't see this. All I really wanted you to see was this, the name of the journal and Towards an Integrated Understanding of the Human Affectome. That's the editorial by the guest editors for the journal. And if you just Google the Human Affectome or special issue, you'll get the whole special issue. All the articles come up on one page together. Okay. Now, Daniela Schiller, who's in New York City, who works at a neuroscience lab, was the person I recruited to lead the synthesis. And her task was to get 170 neuroscientists to all, and psychologists and psychobiologists, et cetera, to agree on a final paper that represented what they all had to say. And to presumably come out with a model. I mean, that was the goal. And we started by she started by her grad student, by the way, is a woman named Alessandra Yu. She's brilliant and did just a fantastic job. The two of them, outstanding, both of them. They started by trying to piece together the project using the pieces that I had brought them. You know, here are the pieces that we have. Let's try and put this into a framework. And it just wasn't working. And she was frustrated. They were frustrated. And at some point they went back to basics. They said, you know, we have overlapping categories. We don't know how these pieces fit together. We need to start at like first principles and go right back to the beginning and say, like, we know nothing. And their goal was to, you know, bridge different assumptions in the field, because a lot of people coming at the problem from different directions. And they use teleological principle. Like, what's the purpose of the human organism? Like, let's go right to ground zero and say, what's the purpose of a multi-celled organism? And can we build from there? And that's what they ended up doing. Now, here's where they started. Okay, so the human has to be able to ensure viability, like stay alive. An organism can be considered a system or network of interconnected parts. Bear with me for reading this. Regenerating and distinguishing itself with the ultimate purpose of autonomously ensuring its own persistent recreation and integrity. Okay, pretty fundamental. In order to go forward in the world, we have to be able to do things. So the organism has to be able to do some things in the world. We have to be able to act in our environment. They call this to execute operations. We have to do things that are relevant to us. They have to have meaning or a purpose. And the feelings that we experience, we refer to them as qualia, are expressions that we use to help us understand the meaning of the things that are happening to us as we go about doing the things that we do. And we need to be able to entertain abstraction, because humans have a special capacity to be able to think beyond our immediate circumstances and our immediate environment. We need to be able to do thought experiments or envision what might happen far into the future, many steps away from our immediate concerns. We have to be able to think abstractly about what's going on. And so this was sort of the foundation of the framework that they built. And then to try to avoid the idea of having overlapping categories of things, they said, okay, we need to have, there's a hierarchy of concerns that the human has to have. And the first ones are physiological. They're about integrity of ourselves, physical integrity. And of course, there's a lot of people studying physiological factors as it relates to affect. And then there are operational, which is kind of like everything that, our engagement in the world, but also what they call global concerns, which is our trajectory. How are we faring overall? Is this, whatever it is that we're doing, is it working for us or not? And I'm going to talk to you about the idea of a comfort zone, because it's really important here. It was coined by Jaak Panksepp, who was part of this project. He wrote the book Affective Neuroscience many years ago. He passed during the early stages of this project. He passed away. But this idea of comfort zone is really important. I'm gonna give it to you in some detail today. And then from an optimization standpoint, is what I'm doing in the world right now the best fit for what I could or should be doing? I mean, this is like, is my career what I should be doing? But this is like, are my activities right now the best use of my time, if you want to think of it that way? Okay, they also make mention of valence and arousal. These are terms you've all seen in the literature, because when we think about affective experiences, we think valenced experiences, things that are positive or very positive, things that are negative or very negative. And we often associate like how much arousal is associated with that. Now, I could have a whole argument with anybody on valence and arousal, because I always thought arousal was an odd choice of metric. It's something that we can measure in the lab. So I think we've always paired them together. It's like, let's measure arousal, because that's something we can do. It's an easy win if you're trying to gather data. But it turns out that our arousal systems are related to other things. And so that, to me, it's not always really relevant. And there have been lots of studies trying to show that certain feelings or emotions are associated with certain valence, and it often doesn't play out. Anyway, that's a different discussion, but we acknowledge that these are attributes that we can give to feelings or affective experiences. So a couple of things here, and I kind of made this point already, is that these are articulated feelings, the things that we say in language. There are definitely feelings that we have that we can't put into words, and you will have said, I can't explain it right now, or I can't describe it, but I definitely have this bad feeling or whatever, and it may be escape your words. So we're not saying only articulated feelings matter. We're saying all feelings matter. We're just saying that we're going to use language to help us understand as much as we can understand. It includes emotional feelings, which you talked about, but it also includes other types of feelings as well that are related to other aspects of the concerns that we have as an organism. And it includes aesthetics, which I mentioned already, different visual, audible, smell, taste, movement, whether you're dizzy or you have a good sense of balance, or these kinds of things related to your location or your stability are parts of the senses that we have that are still part of the affective realm. Okay, now let's see. So this is the diagram. It's in our paper. I don't know what to make of it. I don't mean that in any kind of a negative way. I'm just saying people said, well, why the triangles? You know, should they have been straight? I don't know. I think you can understand what's important to me is that this teleological approach, like why do we, what's our purpose or how do we exist, is probably a good framework for starting to develop a model, because it's neutral on all assumptions. It's just saying these are the things the organism has to do. And these categories that they've created help us give non-overlapping categories that we can find a home for the things that we want to talk about, put them all under one umbrella and say there isn't anything else. Whatever it is that you're doing right now in affective neuroscience research, it's in this umbrella. It's under there, okay? Now, if I could give you just a quick, this is a little busy, but if I can give you a quick breakdown. So under physiological areas of concern, we've already talked about this: nourishment, energy levels, pain, of course, visual, these things. Operational concerns could be related to things you do when you feel safe, things that you do when you're dangerous, feelings that you're having if something is stopping you from doing what you want to do, if you've had to face some kind of a loss in your life, curiosity concerns, cooperation with other people, moral concerns you might have, aesthetics, et cetera, et cetera. This actually could go on and on, as you can imagine. With as many feelings as we have, this could be a big list. They just give some examples to show this is where these would fit under this big tent, if you will. The global concerns trajectory is really about, I would say, probably a good equate to mood, right? Are things generally going in a positive direction when we express moods? You know, he's in a good mood. This is like, is the general trajectory of things going well or poorly? And optimization is often about, you know, how are you right now? Are things good, like overall, or bad? Those would be what we would call well-being terms, but they're really like a meta assessment or an aggregated assessment of maybe a lot of little things, right? Did you have enough food? Are you tired? Did you get enough rest? All those things that would make you kind of okay in all those areas, that puts you in a good place. If some of those things aren't working out for you, or if you didn't get enough food or you didn't get enough rest, we know that that has an impact on our emotional character. Okay. So now I want to talk to you about the comfort zone. Now, this is a really important concept because this is going to apply across the board. So I will share kind of what this looks like. If you take any one of these areas, doesn't matter whether it's a physiological area, whether it's an emotional area, whether it's feeling related to how you're treated by other people. If you take like whether you're lonely or you feel well connected, whether you have moral issues, whatever. If you take any one area, there's probably a space in there where you're okay. We call that a comfort zone, okay, where the current circumstances are all right. If we talk about hunger, if I said, are you hungry right now? And you said, no, I'm good. Okay, that you're in your comfort zone. If we didn't feed you for, you know, the rest of the afternoon, at some point you'd be like, I'm hungry. And by tonight, if you still didn't have any food, you'd be, I got to get something to eat. And by tomorrow morning, you're thinking, I've got a real problem. Okay. And on the flip side, if I started feeding you food right now and you said, you know, I'm full, and I just kept pushing food on you and saying you have to eat more, and you're like, you're in a competition, at some point you'd be like, I have had enough food. And if you keep pushing food in my mouth, I have a problem, right? So we like to say that at most of these dimensions, areas of concern, there's a a state at one side where you're too depleted or there's a surplus and it's not acceptable. And those are stress zones. Basically, you're in stress outside of your comfort zone. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean that just because you didn't get enough to eat, you're stressed? No, but if you got to a point that you're not comfortable anymore and you're like, I definitely need something to eat, that's a bit of stress. Okay. And if I started, what if you didn't have anything to drink? That's more stress. What if you're tired and you didn't get enough sleep? That's more stress. And so now we start stacking up stress from each one of these deficit areas, and you're going to start to experience stress that needs to be addressed. And the reverse is true, right? I mean, we could tell you to sleep forever, but at some point you're like, I've had enough sleep. I have to get up, right? So in most of these areas, you can think of them as having some depletion and some surplus at which we're not okay. Now, you might say, what about praise when you feel proud for having done something? Is there any upper limit as to how proud I can feel? Maybe if you were like overwhelmed, they show pictures of like people who like break down because it's just like too much praise and they're like overwhelmed. I need to go home and get in a shell somewhere so I don't have as much, you know, like new stars or something in Hollywood or in singers or something. The point is that we need to think about a comfort zone as being a place where we're okay, where we can be depleted and out of the comfort zone, or we can be in surplus and it's a problem. And those are stressors aggregately. Okay. All right. Now, this is an allostatic model, which means that everybody doesn't have the same comfort zone, and your comfort zone may change over time, right? A baby is born and they cry over everything. If the temperature moves too much high, too low, they cry, right? As they get older, a little less so, but still crying. And eventually, as they become adults, even less crying, but still, right? So our comfort zone can change over time, and people can train themselves. You know, we think about air. How much air do you need? Well, there are deep sea divers, people that do deep water free diving who can go underwater for several minutes with no air. And most people would be in crisis and freaking out. But for them, that's within their comfort zone because they train to do that. So we can change our comfort zone in each one of these dimensions. There's some ability. And that's different. An allostatic model is different than a homeostatic model. Like your body temperature is 37 degrees or whatever, and it's always going to be there, and your body will manage to always put it back in the same place. Whereas our comfort zone can change over time, depending on how we're adapting. And if I live in the Arctic, I may need to be better in cold weather. And my temperature comfort zone may change. I may be much more tolerant of cold weather than somebody who lives in Jamaica. Fair enough? Okay. Now, here's a bunch of them stacked up. Each one of these items is its own thing. Each one of these items is its own little area of concern that has an intolerable depletion that creates stress and a surplus which creates an excess that's unacceptable, that creates stress for us. Okay. And the question is, that's just 200. Now, all of those 3,664 areas of concern I told you about are not all individual. Some of them might be the same way of describing hunger 7 different ways. And some that describe extreme hunger and some that describe slightly hungry, right? So that set of feelings gets smaller. But even if we accounted for that and brought it down to like, I don't know, 1,000 or 800, this is only 200. So I want you to think about the human brain as managing several hundred of these simultaneously all the time, every day, every minute, every waking day, managing all these areas of concern simultaneously. And then I'm going to talk about how our behaviors then are influenced by us managing deficits or surpluses in all these areas that occur because when you have to go to the toilet, eventually you can hold it as long as you want, but eventually people better get out of the way because you're going to make it happen, right? And that's kind of what happens in all these areas because we get priorities. And when those priorities come like this is extreme, deal with it, nothing else matters, right? So that's what we're talking about. Okay. So what's the supporting neurobiology? And that's what I want to talk about today, because when we get into the neuroscience, it gets really, neuroscience is complicated and there's so much research and every aspect of everything has been analyzed to death. And it's hard to try to see the forest for the trees. How do you draw from that something that is kind of can be simpler and universal without simplifying it in a way that's oversimplifying it? Okay, that's really what we're looking for. Now, I want to talk about this from the perspectives of disincentives for things that we don't want and incentives for things that we do, and the idea of stress. And I want to connect these things together, and then I want to talk about neurobiology, and then we can have a discussion. Okay. So first of all, most of you know we have a wanting system. We have a difference between wanting and liking, right? Wanting is motivation to get something, and liking is the pleasure that you derive when you get it. And in our brain, dopamine networks in the mesolimbic area are primarily known to do with wanting. Okay. Now, if you read, there are some papers on lots of papers in this area, of course. There are other areas that talk about it, maybe androgen and estrogen matter because or maybe like there's a lot of like maybe what ifs because they all connect to dopamine. But I've stripped this down to dopamine because it seems like in most cases, if there's a motivation that the dopamine system is engaged somehow. So I'm not saying the individual aspects of your biology, like maybe when you're hungry, because we know, for example, when you're hungry and you start feeding, dopamine is generated. It's a positive reinforcement. Like this is good. Keep doing this. So we know these systems individually may connect to the dopamine network, but we have a wanting system. Okay. Now, we also have a liking system, and it's largely driven by the OFC, insula, and ventral pallidum. This circuit is kind of well described in the literature. And then these different pieces are relevant. And I'm going to try and give this to you at a sort of help you understand them. Most of you know GABA as having to do with anxiety or fear. But you have to think about if you're going to enjoy something and you want it to be pleasurable, you can't be fearful. You can't be high anxiety and really enjoy something. And so GABA levels are managed to inhibit excitation, in particular as it relates to fear and anxiety. And under the right circumstances, things can be pleasurable. If GABA is at such levels that you are anxious or fearful, you don't have the ability to experience pleasure in the same way. So GABA levels matter. Okay. We have endogenous opioids, which are, of course, when we do exogenous opioids or people are injecting heroin or something, we know that there's this positive sensation. This is pleasure. It's a pure, frankly, it's the center of this system, but it doesn't work without GABA at the right level. We also have oxytocin, which in particular is related to social bonding and mothers and babies and partners, etc. Called the love hormone. This is related when we're talking about social, okay? And we have endocannabinoids, which are actually a negative feedback loop for the stress axis. So what happens is, most of you know about the HPA axis, starting, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and then adrenals generate cortisol into the system under stress. And there's certain reasons for that. I think they're on the next slide or something. The point is that there has to be a way to shut that off, or otherwise you'd always be on stress. But endocannabinoids within your body shut it off. So it's like, oh, we've got enough stress, stop that. Okay. Of course, for the same reason that GABA is there, you have to have you can't be in a stress situation to really enjoy something that's pleasurable. So these are all related to our liking component of our system. Now, there's our stress axis, and you'll notice that the release of cortisol helps increase blood sugar, more energy. Suppresses the immune system. Again, prioritize energy towards fighting off whatever or dealing with whatever crisis you might be facing when you're under stress. And it suppresses digestion because they want energy on your brain and large muscles so that you can do something for whatever the crisis is that you're in, whatever it is that's causing you stress. Of course, this is supposed to be temporary. You experience stress and hopefully you deal with it and then you're better. So people who have chronic stress, this is a problem because this is going all the time. Okay. Now, on the negative side of things, one outcome is if you're under stress and you've got areas of concern that are in deficit is sadness. Okay, this is well characterized in the neuroscience literature. It is something that happens to people who are not unable to improve their current circumstances, and their current circumstances are a problem. So these are related. We've got anger. Now, when you do the neuroscience research on anger, it's not like a tightly wound circuit. It's not like you can find the physiological correlates of anger. It seems more like a cognitive process, but there's definitely an autonomic component to it. So it's not that everybody has it under control, as we've seen people who blow up and then they appear to be not themselves. So this is from an emotional standpoint, this has that autonomic component that interests us. But anytime you're faced with a big loss or a big setback and you've got someone, something, even yourself to blame, anger or a frustration, which I call mini anger, to follow. Okay, so this is a piece of it. And if you think about your body's ability to sense what could go wrong in the future in those areas that are stress related, I'm not going to have enough food by the time everything closes, or I need water before tomorrow morning, or I'll die in this desert or whatever. When you think about anxiety and fear, that's another component. This is the temporal component of our body, understanding what happens if we allow these things to go into deficit in ways that put us in crisis. Okay. And of course, we can always reflect on our history. So we can, as much as our body and through fear can look forward, or anticipate forward, or have expectations forward, we can always look backwards, in some ways recreate. And we know that negatively valenced memories are stronger. Things with high valence that are negative, we remember best. And of course, some people can go, if they go back there, they're like right back there. And sensory experiences they had at the time, smells, what they were seeing, it's all very vivid, and it can be horrifying if it was an awful experience, but it's definitely something that we have the ability to do. So it's not just static what's immediate in front of us, it's what can we anticipate in the future and what do we know about the past. And you can imagine from a survival standpoint that's important, because obviously if we have a negative experience, we want to remember it so we're not repeating it in the future. So from a survival standpoint, that matters. All right. So I want you to think about hundreds of areas of concern where things drop out that matter, things that are important to us, that when I say matter, they all matter, but something is outside of our comfort zone and it's causing stress and we have to deal with it. And it could be as simple as I need to go to the toilet, but it could be I need food, or it could be somebody just said something horrible to me and called me a terrible name and my self is under siege. And I'm worried about my reputation. And now I've got a crisis on my hands because I didn't believe people could think that about me. Okay. It could be any one of hundreds of different things, concerns that we have. That these things accumulate. If we allow a lot of them to stack up and they're unaddressed, it's like the Guantanamo prisoners. The US military has a handbook, don't feed them, don't give them water, starve them of air, play music they don't like. There's how many don't let them sleep. How many stressors can we add to them to break them? Okay, a horrible thought, but you can see how these things can stack up. So in our lives, we have to be aware that these individual pieces all matter and they all contribute to our overall stress. Okay. I'm going to represent all of these, picture a couple of hundred of them or several hundred of them, with priorities being things that matter. I'm going to represent them all as just one for a moment. This is our overall comfort zone. How are you doing? But I don't want you to forget that underneath this one box, there's a very subtle thing over here. I put affective states, plural, with the S. I just want you to recognize that that box on the next slide, I'm talking about hundreds, not one. Okay. I would like to say that what we have now is a basic system that allows us to deal with a wide range of things that provides for the incentives to keep us in our comfort zone, the wanting and liking that happens in this green area, which is our comfort zone. And we have disincentives in the areas that cause us stress. Now, physiologically, we have pain. That's an important one because all over your body, we have pain everywhere. The slightest anything causes you pain. So we have ways in which to disincentivize you. There's not a well-described disliking system, but things definitely have negative valences in terms of our experience in affective neuroscience. When we experience something that's negative, we know it. And we have the extreme things like disgust, which are autonomically invoked, that create aversive or avoidance kind of behaviors. And those three, sadness, anger, and fear, are all related to us either being in deficit or surplus in any one of these areas of concern. So what are the behavioral implications of this? Well, in all these areas that are okay, what does that mean for the average human going about their day-to-day life? Well, you've got generally, I'm going to continue to do the things that allow me to keep all of these areas that I care about in my comfort zone. Okay, that's the first thing. That means seeking rewards and consummatory behaviors like going after food and eating it, or you name it, things that would fall under that category. Maintenance behaviors to keep going. You know, everything's working, don't mess with it. People say that because they've got a routine going in their life where a lot of things are going well and everything seems to be working well and they can deal with the few things that come up. Okay. And now some people will do comfort zone exploration or expansion. I'm going to try skydiving. I've always been afraid of heights, but I'm going to push the envelope next weekend, and maybe by December, I'll be doing those wingsuits, you know, down the side of a mountain. But the point is that we can talk about expanding our comfort zones through a wide range of behaviors because we're free to do whatever we want as long as we stay somewhere within our comfort zone. As soon as we push outside of it, we've got a problem, right? And those areas where we're outside of our comfort zone, like I didn't expect this, I didn't want to go bungee jumping, and how do I get these things off my legs, right? Because I'm terrified right now and I'm hanging on to the railing for dear life because fear has overcome my body, right? When we're in stress under these, we get avoidance behaviors. How do I get out of here? How do I get away from this? Or we address those needs through taking some sort of action to make those things get fixed. Okay. Now, you're not going to find any of this stuff that I just showed you in our paper. You get everything to where the model is. This is the umbrella, the big tent for affective neuroscience. You get an explanation of what allostasis is, the fact that we can change our comfort zone. You get an explanation of what the comfort zone is. You get an idea that we have areas of concern and what those areas are, and then that's where it stops. So what I'm showing you is my editorial on where we need to be thinking, because this has big implications, right? This is a fairly simple way of thinking about a very complex set of thousands of feelings, which maybe, let's agree, might only be several hundred areas of concern, some of which are emotions, some of which are drives, some of which are completely psychologically constructed, maybe culturally constructed, but they're things that people care about. And the same systems are being used, multi-purpose, simple systems, to address all of them. Nobody says that fear works the same way across all these areas. That's not in the literature. Nobody says that dopamine is always the motivating, the wanting part for all of these areas, or that opioids and those other neurohormones or neurotransmitters that I showed you are all in play when we're in the right space in all of these areas. That's not research that exists. It's not in the peer-reviewed literature. I'm telling you, that's what I think is happening based on what I've seen so far. But I'm pushed you beyond the peer-reviewed literature to Leroy's editorial of what we have, which is a fairly simple system dealing with a complex set of parameters or variables that we're all dealing with all the time. And our body has a fairly simple way of managing them all. Okay, questions? That's my talk.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said there's an area of concern that is loss,
Yes.
right?
Oh, well, all of these areas are areas where a loss could occur. So think of hundreds of areas where a loss could be experienced. That loss isn't a single area, but a loss is essentially a setback in an area where you're in your comfort zone and now you're not. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like a loss is a general term that can be applied across any number of things that were okay and now they're not.
Okay. I kept thinking about grief as a dimension in where you would have like a comfort zone, but I can imagine like too little grief.
So think about if we went through all the things that people have as feelings when somebody dies, what happens is they've lost a lot. They've had a bunch of things that were being addressed or needs that were being met by one person, right? Their social connectivity was being met by that person. Being treated well by others was being met by that one person. Maybe their self-confidence was boosted by things that person said to them. And so we've got all these areas of concern, and that one person that died was serving as the main activity. Sorry, I don't mean to refer to the person as an activity, but that one person was serving to make sure that they were in a good space in all those areas. So when someone dies, it's not like that loss can be multifold across many things that matter for that person. All are now not in a good place. So when you think about stress, each one of those areas comes to the front. Stress, 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 stress. Now you've basically dumped a huge amount of stress on somebody because of the loss of the person, and that person. But think about when they say, what is the most, aside from a death, what are some of the most stressful things we do in life? Change our job, change our city, change our partner, all of these things. Each one of those activities has the potential as a single activity to address lots of the things that I need to make sure I'm looking after. And if you change that all up and suddenly all those things that were being served by that one item are now all in the red zone, if I can use that term. Now all those areas are in stress. You need something to replace it quickly because you've got all those individual areas of concern that are in deficit and you need to do something to address them.
So if all that stress would be mediated by the same mechanisms,
So, you know, if you were to say, I just moved and I have no friends and I'm not getting enough to eat and et cetera, and we would start building a list of things for you to do to try and give you activities to get you back to where you were servicing all those areas of need.
but what I'm thinking is on your opinion, maybe
Yeah.
on the mechanism that would mediate that different kinds of stress.
Sure.
Maybe you could try like with an agonist of some of the receptors on the mechanism, and all those different kind of stresses would be like modulated.
Sure. So let's talk about smoking marijuana, right?
I was thinking.
Yeah. So I've got a bunch of stresses all stacking up on me and I smoke a joint and I'm feeling like my stress is reduced because the endocannabinoid receptor is going to be affected by the marijuana that I'm smoking. That's going to shut off my stress reaction and I'm going to feel okay. The problem, obviously, with any pharmacological intervention to a system that's designed to tell you what you need to do is I can sit around and smoke weed, but I still have all my problems. Right. And so I'm happy and I'm not stressed, like I'm chill, but I don't have a whole bunch of issues that are, you know, essentially in the red are not being addressed, even though my system would normally be telling me you should be stressed because you've got action to take right now. So yes, you know, you could do that. You just have to be aware that those interventions, if they're subverting a system that's designed to motivate you to solve those issues, you've essentially short-circuited the system you have to keep you in good health.
Yeah, but if the scientific question is if all those different kinds of stress
Yes.
Are like the same,
Yes.
They would be modulated by the same.
Well, we only have one stress axis that I know of. I mean, we talk about different sources of stress, but the HPA axis is it. We have one central nervous system. So I guess my thesis, if you will, if I want to put a bit of a label on this, is that we only have one stress axis. Why would we have six? You know, biology tends to go for simpler solutions. And if we have lots of different stressors, but we have one stress axis that gives us all the right energy and blood flow to your brain and big muscles because you better be acting to do something about your problems, then okay, that's one system to deal with lots of different things. Why should we think that the other systems that we have to anticipate danger in the future wouldn't be one system? Or that our sadness that we experience when things aren't going well would be several versions of sadness? Or why would we think that our motivating systems that creates wants is going to be several different motivating systems? Now, I'm not trying to oversimplify because I know there's been a lot of research done in each of these areas, but I'm trying to find common threads where we can say let's explore the likelihood that we have a single motivational system and that all of these areas are reinforced with dopamine when you're doing the right things towards getting you. So when you chase a reward, for example, we know from using mice there's a optogeometry, the process of sort of monitoring what's going on in mice's neurons when they're doing things. We can actually see that more dopamine is being released as they get closer to the reward for food, for example. But it doesn't have to be food; it could be something else. So why not consider the possibility that same this is called the dopamine ramping, where as you get closer to your reward, you're getting more, you want it more because you're getting closer. That dopamine ramping that we know happens in the brain, why isn't that applicable to all areas where we have deficits that need to be addressed? I think if you ask me to go spend the weekend digging through the literature, finding examples where I could say, oh, dopamine's also related to this thing, and it's also related to that thing, and it also shows up here. We could find a bunch. I'm arguing, what if it's all of them? Nobody's done that. Well, first of all, we didn't have all of them because we don't have a list. The people are working in their silos. So, but I'm saying if we've got evidence of a bunch of them, maybe it's all of them. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I was thinking about the universal affect model and maybe, for example, some people with alexithymia, and think about, is there or what are your thoughts on it has to be like a fixed number of affective states that are like for all of the, like a universal number of affective states that we all have, or maybe it is like individual for all the people, and it's not like maybe some people have to be like have, for example, 100 affective states.
Sure.
And it has to be-
Okay, so a couple of things. I don't pretend to say that the English language vocabulary that we went and searched using computational linguistics is going to be a definitive list by any stretch. Okay, culturally, people have different concerns. Some people in some cultures think are good things and positive. Other people in other cultures might think are negative. So we have to anticipate there's going to be variability by language and by culture for sure. We also have to anticipate, so you know the arguments in the literature about basic emotions versus constructed emotions, and are there truly basic emotions? We don't really go there in our project, and I'll tell you why. Because there's no disagreement that there are some autonomic kinds of reactions, like fear, for example, whether it's basic or it's constructed in the brain, it's there. And it shows up and you don't have any control over it. It takes control of you. And I don't know of any human examples of people that don't have any fear or anxiety unless it's a specific neurological deficit. We know that this is like common. Okay. I think this gets us closer to a smaller set of autonomic emotion categories that actually can fit around a single engine that can help us address many areas of concern without having to have arguments over whether jealousy is an emotion or not, because there's hundreds of feeling terms that relate to all kinds of aspects about social relations, etc. So I'm more of the belief that we probably have a small set of functional machinery, both that relates both to, if I can just go to this slide again, that relates to how we deal with areas that are put us under stress that need to be addressed, and a small amount of functional machinery that helps motivate us to get to the places that we need to do to address those items. And frankly, from a simplicity standpoint, from my perspective, it's more likely that there are some common traits amongst humans, the whole species, that accomplish those things. Like, I think the likelihood that some people have dopamine systems for reward, but somebody who lives on an island off the coast of Australia doesn't have that system, I think that's unlikely. I think we've seen many of these systems were explored in the early days by looking at different mammals, different types of rodents, different types of species, primates, etc. A lot of the pharmacological pathways that we've seen, this is all based on a lot of animal research preceded human research. And so I think we're getting to a point where we can agree that there are some common systems here, not necessarily basic or constructed, but that there are some autonomic components and some common neurobiological, neuropharmacological pathways that we can agree. Everybody who smokes a joint, what doesn't matter whether you're Japanese or whatever, is going to have a similar kind of an effect, because they all have brains with a similar structure, roughly, if you're in our species. Does that make sense?
I have a question.
Sure.
Related to the work. I think it's very interesting, this approach that you take, that you did in cancer, like try to put all together this global vision, and also for affective neuroscience. My question is, how do you finance your work? Because publishing a paper is very expensive, and maybe you can do this in your weekends, like you said when you started to be interested in cancer, but at some point you need to have some.
Okay, so in the 3 projects that I did, I wanted all the articles to be open access. Very expensive. Some of them are like a special issue might cost you $40,000 US for everything open access, and that's not a small number. So I got big teams. I had a total of, let's say, 200 researchers. I told all the PIs that were team leaders, you don't have to pay. I told all the people who were on the teams as middle authors on the team papers, they would get 2 publications in a top peer-reviewed journal. And for many of them, that was, there are a lot of researchers that don't have a lot of papers. So if you tell them they're going to get 2 top-tier publications out of a project, and the total expense is $500, they find it in their lab budget to pay it out of some grant, because frankly, if they could get 2 top-tier publications, as long as they can provide credit for the granting agency and the money that it came from, that was helpful. I told anybody from a lesser developed country using United Nations list of lesser developed countries, none of those people had to pay. Every PI in the project was allowed to have a postdoc or a PhD student help them, and they got 2 publications as well, and they didn't have to pay. And so without the team leaders paying, without any of the postdocs or PhD students paying, and without anybody from lesser developed countries paying, I had just enough money scraped together to pay the journal most of the time. And in a couple instances, I went to the journal and said, I don't quite have enough money, but would you take this amount instead? Because this $37,000 is burning in a hole in my bank account, and it's all I have. And they went, okay. So, yeah.
I had a similar question regarding like financing, but about the gathering you did in
Yes,
Belfast.
yes.
How did you get like 100 scientists?
I used, I was at a college at the time, and we had a brand new campus with a beautiful amphitheater. So I got that for free. I charged them all $250 for the workshop or something, which I used to cater food and to get some live entertainment, and I took them kayaking. I showed them beautiful pictures of Halifax, which is a lovely waterfront city. And I said, everybody doesn't have to come, but we'd like everybody to come. And out of about 200 scientists, maybe 70 of them came from each project. So I had a pretty good turnout. It was enough to have a robust discussion of issues. And then we recorded and took notes, and everybody went back and shared that with their teams, and it brought people together, gave them an opportunity to all get on the same page, etc. But essentially, it didn't cost me anything. I just ran it as a break-even activity off the back of an envelope. I mean, I used Excel, but yeah.
It's a really amazing amount of work, but I really like that it seems like bringing together the early emotion theories of saying, there's a physiological feeling and emotion associated, and that's we have our rest and digest and all these systems, but then expanding it out to more like social allostasis, like in considering everything as a I guess limit bound, not only within physical systems but within pretty much all of human experiences. Very interesting.
Your brain has to process it all. And my feeling is that it's likely that it's doing it all with one set of tools that works for everything. Now, it sounds like, in particular, as it relates to social relationships, that there's like oxytocin, for example, there are other neurochemistry in the mix. But I think probably those core systems exist for everything that you need to do to deal with in your quest for survival. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you so much.